All right, everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about organization and some things that we do at Blur. Some of this is going to be very specific to what we do at Blur. Much of this is going to require that you are using an onion of some nature. So you will see I have my trusty onion. I have it organized in the fashion that I showed you before. So I think, doing something like this is very important. If you're working in a production pipeline and somebody else is going to pick up your file, they're going to also be working in this stuff. It's important to have some sort of organization. It doesn't have to be this exactly, but somebody else needs to be able to make sense of it. The other thing that we'll do, and I know there's always like to proxy or to xref, right? And so think, Chad. So when we're making these libraries, generally we are xrefing, and the reason being is that these are editable by a larger group of people when they're xrefed. If I start proxying each of these, which is great to have the V-Ray proxy and to have the smaller footprint and whatnot. Somebody can't go in and they can't like tweak the UVs specifically on this or add to this library of assets. And unfortunately, to Max's downfall, or one thing that sucks about our xrefing system is that you can't have like this existing library and then artists add to it, and if it's all parented to something, it will update automatically, whereas Maya will do that. That's my bag on Max. I mean, in general, xrefing is terrible, and I don't advise using it. But we do need to get stuff done, and we do need to be able to work in a functioning environment, with multiple people. So something like this, I would xref these leaves, right? And I would come out and references and xref objects, and I would convert selected objects to xref. I generally like to work this way, where it's more live. I'm a little bit more loosey-goosey in the beginning, and then start to like rein myself in as things go. So I have a project that's generally we work under this like environments tab, and I've created a little testing, and we'll have other subfolders here, but there's always a master, and this is where we put like our xref objects, and we might name this xref leaves set dress. Okay, so now they're still there, right? Same leaves, and these guys should, yep, they are all now xrefed. So my scene will be a little bit smaller, and now, these guys exist outside, so if somebody else wants to grab them and tweak them, and it's going to be in multiple shots and whatnot, this is a good way to work. Sometimes, though, you want to create V-Ray proxies. We generally only do that when it's like, this is a one-off thing, right? An environment component, like you have built a building back here, and it's very specific to this shot. So we'll take those components, and I'm just going to build I'm going to make some awesome hero architecture here. I'm going to make some Michael Graves architecture. I should put a teapot in here if I really wanted it to be Michael Graves. And a target sign. Okay, so let's suppose that this is, our building. Very, very simple. So what I might want to do is, if this thing is really heavy, we've sculpted it, it's ZBrush, all that stuff. I will take this, and I will grab each of these guys and come and V-Ray mesh export. And again, if I go out to E, master, and then I'll make a new folder. Okay, and in this case, I'm going to export all selected objects as a single file. I want each of these to be a single file. In the event that I want to recall them or do other stuff with them, I don't like saving them down as one object. And, damn. Alright, so this V-Ray version is not good. There's some new features that we don't have. So, the face in preview, this can be whatever. It's fine. We actually have a tool, and I looked to see if it was in our latest tree grunt, and it's not. That on export takes these guys, throws a pro optimize on them, pro optimizes it per your specification, and you can do this. You can create proxy geo, or preview meshes for these ahead of time, and then you can specify a preview mesh. All of this is available to you. We just have a kind of one-click solution to that then takes your super high-res stuff and converts it into low-res stuff that you can see in viewport a little bit better, as opposed to if I say, I only want, really honestly, these are boxes, so. And okay. Oh, and I didn't automatically convert because I'm not paying attention. Automatically create proxies. In this case, I want to bring them right into the scene, very similar to what I did with the. Yes, I want to overwrite. Okay, and now we have this is pretty sweet. And so the reason we do that with creating these low-res versions, the preview files, is that in scene this kind of sucks to look at, and it's fine if you've got everything established. I spent years working with something like this, but if for some reason you want something else, then you can. Let's all right, so you could you could clone these guys. They're boxes, so there's not much to them, but you could clone them and set them on a separate layer, and then if so copy and call this box proxy with a Y, not an IE. New layer. Come on. All right. Nope. Oh yeah. This is annoying. No. Thank you, Max. Now I've selected. I've flipped my my thing here. There we go. So I have my box proxy. Yes. And now I have my box. Alright, so I have my preview mesh, which is going to be this object, and then I have my box, which was presumably my high-res object. And automatically create proxy, say okay, overwrite that one, and now I'm just going to delete that guy, and you'll see that this is now a V-Ray proxy, and previewing from files, it is this kind of low-res proxy geodude. You can do the same stuff with your XREF objects as well. We often, if it's a high-res environment, we'll create a lower-res proxy version of it to view in viewport because of the nature of our environments. And as I've talked about, we have foot and character interactions where you want to see something very specific. You want low-res representations of kind of what's going on in the environment, so you can make sure when we get into the scene assembly stage and we're working on shots that a character isn't like running through this wall. And if it were just like points or a couple of faces and it wasn't quite clear, you might end up in a situation where you've rendered frames and, you know, your dude is running through your building, which, you know, not good. So let's say I have this building, and I would make this part of my environment. So new from selection, and well, let's see, building mesh. I must click the OK. Go to organize, and generally something like this. Pull into there, and proxy geos, things like that, those would go in the useful group. Alright, so I've got a building mesh, I've got a terrain with some, you know, some vegetation, and let's say I also want to create a character, so that could be this teapot here, right? Alright, so for something like this, we'll create we'll generally have like high-res characters, low-res characters, things like that. And he might be C teapot. So character being the C. Teapot high-res. And then I would create a new group. Okay, let's bring this. Oh, not what I wanted. And I bring this guy up. I like to keep, you know, my like main layers, which are the environments, the characters, props or vehicles, things of that nature. I'll keep them all kind of together at the top. Okay, so I have my C teapot high res, and so I'm organizing all of these, and you know, you could also make a P for like P props, and you could put if you had a cowboy hat or something like that, or other equipment that doesn't quite fit into the environment specifically. Start to think about, you know, how you want to break this down and organize it. So, and then, you know, this is going to do something for me here by doing this. I've covered XREFs, I've covered, you know, V-Ray proxies, and when we would do them at Blur, we don't use them for everything. Often, like tree libraries, things like that, we actually just XREF those in and scatter them about, because once you've turned them off, and if you freeze them as well, it's really going to bring your viewport performance up as well. And we do that a lot with things that are really high res. We'll just freeze that layer, and you can do that here with just by clicking, well, here, just by clicking these buttons. So now this freezes the layer, or you can turn it to, you know, bounding box as well if you wanted. So if this were a super high res terrain and I wanted to increase my viewport performance, I could do that. So now we've got our camera, we've got our environment, we've got a building, we've got a terrain, and we've got a character, and we have a camera, right? Now this camera is a standard camera, and at Blur we always work with V-Ray cameras. So if I bring my trusty tree grunt back, camera, convert to V-Ray camera. So I'm going to convert this and say yes, and I want to delete my source camera. Yes, I'm going to make it a Blur camera here in a second. So now I have a V-Ray camera, right? And first things first, turn off exposure, turn off vignetting. We don't work with these at Blur. I know some guys do, and I have my opinions on that, and I will refrain from them. Generally, we use a movie cam, and we, depending on the shot, it can be a targeted or not. The next thing is to add data to this guy, so camera data add. So this, basically this puts us into our shot context and frame range. So this is reading the frame range. It's taking that camera, it's labeling it shot 1, and if you come down into here, you could then say, like, you could specify this, I want this to be shot 2, and then you could change the frame range, and all of that is going to update. And the reason this is important is because when you're done with all this, let's say you have 4 cameras, they all have different shot ranges. You have shot 1, shot 2, shot 1 is 0 to 100, shot 2 is 101 to 300, so on and so forth. So you get all these guys set up, right? And you use this convention if you so desired. So now you can go in and you can click on this guy, Open Render Elements. Okay, so right now I've got a, do I have any lighting? I don't have lighting. I've got my environment, my character, and all my bushes. Everything is visible. So oftentimes what we do is we set up different passes, and one of the first passes we'll set up, and first, before I get into this, when we go to create a render element, we will save the file, give it an output. One quick thing is that at present, Blur is not using the V-Ray frame buffer. That is changing. So by the time this is done, we will more than likely have adopted the V-Ray frame buffer. It's kind of a legacy thing, and I can't quite explain it. I have always used the V-Ray frame buffer. I really, I recommend it. But if you don't want to get into like breaking up your passes, all of the stuff, post converts, things like that, this will work out really well for you. If you're not familiar with, KS group. And all these. If you are not familiar with the V-Ray image to open EXR converter, you might want to do this. And really, the render elements doesn't play so nice with V-Ray images at the moment. That will change. So, well, first, this is an eBeauty. I'm going to make a new folder. This is eBeauty all. So this is like our everything on layer. That's generally what we'll call it. God. And save it in EXR. We're going to keep this guy 16-bit. Alright, so I've given it an output, and the other thing I'll do is I'll set up all my settings. I'll get everything the way I want this render element to render, and all of this stuff is changeable after the fact, but normally I'll have all of this set up, and then I will click on New. And this guy's going to say it's going to grab that name from where I'm currently saving, and I will uncheck camera settings. What that's looking to do is save. It's going to save all the properties of your camera, but we don't want to do that in our type of pipeline where layout is working on camera often simultaneously as we're working. You know, the transforms can be updating all the time. They could be updating, you know, field of view. They could be updating a number of things, and if we store this data implicit, it can cause issues. So I'm going to create a new render pass. And what this has done is it's basically saved this as it currently is. So, and this is just my layer on and off and so on and so forth. And let's say, you know, I don't want my camera on. I can come over here and I can say update, and I can update that layer. And now this is updated. The next thing I can do, and if I were to render this, and if, let's say, like, I'll just show you, like, all right, I'll turn some stuff off. I'm working, I'm doing my thing, and at any point I can now say load element, and everything is back, right? So the next thing I will do, and I've talked with, I've mentioned, like, you guys might want to, some of you might want to break things up based on, the fact that you don't have a lot of RAM. So the next thing, aside from deleting that pesky L, that I will do is I'll create an eBeauty. Okay, so for my eBeauty, I don't want my character visible, but perhaps I want him casting shadows. So this is easily done using the onion, and we can do that by using alt properties. You have these little tabs over here, and you can create an alt property. So it's going to tell you that there aren't any, and do you want to create them, and say yes. And then you get this super awesome dialog box. It's pretty much, as far as I'm concerned, the worst dialog box, because you're used to working with object properties and V-Ray properties in a very specific way. And the menus look away, and we're all used to that. And this looks nothing like it, and it's a little odd, but you'll get the hang of it, and it's better than nothing. So we want this to be renderable, right? But we don't want it to be visible to camera. So the first thing you have to do is check that you're going to edit that property, and then you have to uncheck it, which is the same thing as clicking object properties and unchecking visible to camera. But that's the way this works, and you'll see there's V-Ray properties in here as well. So that is the current state of this. All of this is in flux, but so then you can say okay, and now we have an alt property for this that is going to be, when I create this render element, apply to this. Generally, if I start creating alt properties, it's a good idea to copy it to all of the visible layers. So now each of these, even though it's not toggled on, they all have this, and I'll index them. You'll see, like, all not visible to cameras will be here. All matte objects, -1 alphas will be in the next one. It's just kind of good practice to do. Okay, so for my environment, I want my building, and I want this, and I want my bushes and my stuff on. So I'm going to, again, go out. I specified a path, and I'm going to create a new render element from the setup I have currently. Again, turn off camera. Okay, and now I have eBeauty all, which will turn everything on and render everything. And I have eBeauty, which will load this current setup, which if I render, will only render that teapot not visible. So this comes back to why, you might have asked yourself at some point, like, why does Chad use the quick render? Because we rely on these render elements, and we're loading them and tweaking them constantly, and that's loading very high res or high sample settings generally. Like, these will be cranked and tweaked for final render settings. So we'll use this quick render as a way to render and not save, because this render element is set to save right out of the gate. So we use quick render as a way to test frames, and as I've shown you, tweaking your frame size and turning motion blur on and off, displacement off, so on and so forth. All these things are super handy. So, but that's one of the reasons why something like quick render, other than it's just convenient, why those have been implemented. So, all right, I'm just gonna free up some real estate here and open back up my render elements. All right, so now I've saved a beauty all, and I might want to, now I want to do a character pass. So what I would do for that is I want to add all property, So I'm adding that to my building mesh. I'm going to edit this. So if I'm rendering the character, generally I will have my environment as a matte object. Hopefully everybody is familiar with this, and I will have its alpha contribution set to -1. So it's going to cut out, so like something where this passes in front of the character, it will chop out so I can lay those two together. And matte object, alpha, yes, and say OK. And now again, I want to copy to the visible, and I copied all. And that'll keep, like, you'll see, like, this is camera false, this is matte object. So now I'm going to set up all of these guys as matte object, and I'm going to come out and save yet another pass. And this I'm going to call C. I cannot type today. C Beauty. And you can have C Beauty midground, C Beauty foreground, you know, if you've got lots of characters, or you can do this for your props, you can do this for any number of things. Go crazy. Alright, so I've specified my output, and I'm going to say new, create new render pass. Okay, so I've set that up. Now, we're going to get into V-Ray settings and stuff I would recommend next week. And at any point, if you're like, oh man, I wanted to add render elements to my eBeauty, and I didn't, you can come in, you can add these, you can add multi-mats, and then you can come in and you don't have to update the entire thing. You can just update max render elements and say update, and it will update faster. So now your eBeauty is going to have this one, oh, or not, hot, apparently not, probably now my stuff's going to all completely break, but that's okay. If you were to just to say update, it would more than likely work. Oops, I just moved my camera. Generally, too, we'll lock these guys down. I trust that you guys all know how to lock cameras. The other thing, as far as scene organization, now we're going to get into render settings and all of that, and my conversation about multi-mats leads me to my next kind of point. There's getting organized for your max scene and rendering and all of this stuff, and creating your render elements and getting ready to render. And once you have all these render elements set up in your passes, you can start rendering these guys out and knocking them out, right? We're going to go over render elements and what you want to create next week, but I also want you guys to be aware that you should start to set up render elements in your scene. Okay, so if you have not done these before, you should start to set up multi-mats, not render elements. And I'm not saying that you should start adding these to your render element pass if you want to start setting up render elements. What I'm simply saying is start setting object IDs to the objects in your scene. So I generally do these in a logical fashion. Something like this, where it's like a building, and this guy's frozen, which is why I can't select him. I'll set these all like one type, one object ID. If they're all the same material, they're all the same building, stuff like that. And then generally I also give them, like, I might set my environment to be object IDs of 1 through 20. My character is going to be object IDs 30 through 40. My props are going to be object IDs 50 through 60, and so on and so forth, depending on the complexity of things in my scene, effects and other additional stuff. But I go in, and in a way that makes sense to me, I create these object IDs, and I give them, values of 1 through, whatever. You you get to specify this. And then when you create multimats, I hope all of you guys have done this, these numbers, you will line them up to coincide, and you will then name these like multimat 01, multimat 02, so on and so forth. And then these numbers will coincide to object IDs. I'm just covering this real briefly because this is something that you should do. In these really complicated environments, create object IDs for your plants. GrowFX will load that stuff in and it will render with them. So you just go into your source geo, right? And you could say these guys are object ID 3, right? And when GrowFX renders, it will render with that material or multimat. The other thing you can do though too is, if you haven't done this, you can have two different types of multimat elements. You can have one which is object ID based, and then you could have another which, let's call this well, I generally just keep these numbered and number them higher, but you can have another which is shader based. And if you haven't done this, this is how you would do it. Right here you have this material ID channel, and if you go into your material ID and you can specify down here is material ID, and you can check this, right? So now this isn't reading object IDs anymore, it's reading material IDs. Now use this sparingly because you only have 15, okay? So I do not recommend this as like your go-to method for putting material IDs on your stuff, because you're going to run out real fast. But in the instance where it's like, well, I really want to be able to get to my leaves in this one thing, you can do that. You can go for it. And then you can have this guy, like, what you can do, you wouldn't set it here. You would set stalk to be 1, or I wouldn't even set it at all. I would use an object ID to define my global. So I would do like this. I'd say object ID, these guys are going to be 3. And then I want to be able to grab the leaves. So I'd come in and I would set each of the leaves to be an ID of 1. And then in Nuke, I can subtract the leaves or tweak the leaves, pull them out, do whatever I want to isolate them from the other. So I would do something like that. And that's how I would set that up. So you guys should all start putting object IDs on your stuff so that when we get into post and you want to be able to tweak and edit to your heart's content, you will have that power. If you don't, you're re-rendering in order to tweak a shader, and that's highly ineffective. I don't recommend that. So that is the Onion, render elements, Onion organization, using render elements, creating render elements. As I showed, you can load them. You can kind of look through these guys. There's lots of stuff. Some of it might, a lot of it won't pertain to you. As I said, you know, this is like how Blur works. There's some camera range. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here that is very specific to what we do. Now, it's not to say that you can't use this tool. It's certainly usable at home and at your studio if you so desired. But for these purposes, this is not a tutorial on the inner workings of render elements, which there are a lot of. But I will delve more into the Onion and these alt properties. You can have alternate shaders as well. When we get into volumes and environment fog and whatnot, I'll be setting up alternate shaders for those environment fog passes, things like that. So we'll get more into this. So don't feel like I'm just glossing over it and we're not going to come back to it. But this is enough to start to get you thinking and organizing your scenes in a logical fashion. All right?